Hello students, we have come to the second part of your chapter, that is tradition of historiography. We have learned about the historical research method, critically examining the historical sources and writing the historical narrative. The writing of political historical narrative known as historiography. A scholar who writes such a narrative is a historian. As I told you, the whole process what a historian goes through is known as a historiography. Next paragraph. The historian cannot include every past event in his narrative. The inclusion and interpretation of historical events by the historian often depends on the conceptual framework adopted by him. His style of writing is determined by that conceptual framework. Now, as I told you all, whatever the historian is recording, it will not include every minute detail. There can be a point where he may miss something which is not important according to him. So that is applicable. But his interpretation in the book regarding that event or fort or regarding the situation or regarding um, why this historical event took place, any historical event, any historical place, any historical book, whatever he is writing on, he has his own freedom, and that depends on, that is his conceptual framework. The conceptual meaning, it is his concept of writing that book. The third paragraph, the tradition of writing historical narrative, that is historiography, was not prevalent in the ancient societies of the world. However, it is very clear from this, children, that in the olden days nobody kept a record, nobody maintained a record. It has come as time passed by, and as education, that is very important, as education, people began to read and write, if people could understand how to read and write, that's the time when recording of different important things in the world started getting recorded in the different in the different spheres of subjects, I would say. However, that does not mean that they are not aware of the historical time or were not eager to know about it. Ancient people also felt the need of passing on the stories of the life and valor of the ancestors to the next generation. Ancient communities all over the world use various means like cave paintings, storytelling. One minute, children. Storytelling, singing songs and ballads except for this purpose. These tradition means are looked upon as a source of history in the modern historiography. Now, in olden days, however time the people spent, they wanted that the next generation, suppose an elderly person is telling to his children, sitting around him, stories about how he grew up. What was the time when when there was no school, and how did they spend the time? They spend their time in a very creative manner by making certain objects, by making certain toys, by painting, by singing, by bringing out some dance forms, all these things. So he has told his children have understood what the times must have been, and people actually spend their time in this manner. Okay, people who lived in the caves, how did they spend their time? Whatever they saw in nature, they put it up in the cave or they painted in the cave. So, ballets. When there was time, they decided, let's do some dance. They created their own steps. It was such a introspective from the. It was so introspecting that those kind of thoughts came that let's dance, let's sing together. They wanted socialism. They wanted people to be together. Otherwise, boredom would have set in a very deep manner. So all these things makes a history, children. It is a history of the past, and that too in the present, in a textbook for the future. Got it? So these traditional means are looked upon as a source of history in the modern historiography. Now let's see what is modern historiography. It is giving you about the characteristics. Before I go to modern historiography, I would like to go to the pink box for you all to understand better. They have given you do you know? The earliest inscription in the Louvre Museum. The above picture shows a fragment of the earliest inscription A forward marching file of soldiers holding shields and spears is seen here. The general is in the front. That means this paragraph tells you in the piece that they have shown in your textbook how an army marched and how was it led. There was a, what it says, there was a general in front. That means there was a leader. For anything to go in order, you require a leader. For example, if you want a class to require, there has to be a teacher, otherwise the class is a chaos, as you very well know it. So the general trained these soldiers how they have to move towards the battle. So there was discipline in every act of theirs. The tradition of recording historical events can be traced back to Sumer civilization. This picture is telling you about the Sumer civilization in Mesopotamia. Names of Sumerian kings and the stories. This piece has all these things in it, which gives the historian a complete picture to write his book, his framework, his conceptual framework. Have been preserved in various inscriptions. The earliest inscription shown about dates back to 4500 BC, that is before Christ era. It records a battle fought between two kingdoms. It is now displayed at the Louvre Museum. As you all know very well, in olden days, the kings fought a battle. They had to, because they had to show their valor, they had to show their strength, and they had to show how much can they really conquer. The more places they conquered, the more powerful he was regarded. Therefore, battles had to be fought. Now let's come to the modern historiography. What does it say? It gives you 4 characteristics. All that is already said in my first lecture. Its method is based on scientific principles. It begins with the formation of relevant questions. These questions are anthropocentric. It means that it is already explained what is anthropocentric. It means that these questions are about the deeds of the members of ancient human societies of a particular period. That means during the, say, Mughal period, whatever deeds they did, besides fighting a battle also, how did they look after their soldiers? How did they feed the soldiers? How did they shelter the soldiers? Everything in detail is recorded by the historian. History does not suggest any interaction between divine and human beings. Yes, spirituality in history does not exist, children. Answers to these questions are supported by reliable evidence. As I told you once again, I tell you, in the first lecture I told you that it requires evidence, which is seen and felt. That is evidence. History presents a graph of mankind's journey with the help of the past human beings. It is said that the modern historiography with above characteristics has its roots in the ancient Greek history writing. History is originally a Greek term, as I told you in the beginning. Herodotus, the Greek historian of the 5th century BCE, used its first for his book entitled The Histories. Now let's come to the third part, development of scientific perspective in Europe and historiography. This is going to tell you about how did these historians help the coming historians to do a research, how they should do a research. They are giving a guidelines. All these are historians who are giving guidelines to the coming up historians how to write a history book, how to go about with the research of the history. Till the 18th century, as you all know, children, history is divided into 3 parts: ancient, medieval, and modern. Ancient will take you till the 13th century, medieval takes from 14th to 18th century. This is your modern history till the 18th century CE. Europe had achieved a remarkable progress in the fields of philosophy and science. Scholars by then had come to believe in the possibility of studying the social and historical truths by applying scientific methods. Now the philosophical discussion focus more and more on the objectivity in history and historiography. It is the main objective of this development in the history is the difference to know what is history and what is historiography. History is the book that is going to be written by the historian, and the process that he followed to write that book with the evident facts, with the evidence, with the conceptual evidence, conceptions which can be seen and felt, is called as historiography. Prior to the 18th century, all European universities were interested only in the philosophical discourse revolving around divine phenomena. That means in the olden days, in the ancient history, it only revolved regarding the existence of the universe. And when I say universe, it includes everything in the universe. So people focus more on it. If you, for example, if you take your the rishis who came and settled, the first rishis who came and settled in India, in Punjab, among the 5 rivers, what did they do? Their whole life circulated only around the divine phenomena. That is your existence of the rains, existence of the air, existence of the fire, existence of the wind. Okay, all this was very important for them, and therefore they had the, what you call it as, the bhog, or that fire in which they put everything, whatever food they got from nature, they put and they offered it to God, thanking God for all that they got from nature. That is the divine phenomenon. So in ancient times, people concentrated more on that. However, gradually the scenario began to change. In 1737 CE, the Göttingen University was founded in Germany. Now, this university for the first time had an independent department of history, first time. Later, other German universities also became centers of historical studies. That means this university paved the way for the historians to really work on the research work on history. Now we come to the notable scholars. I may be able to do 2 notable scholars, remaining we shall do in the third lecture. The contributions of many scholars are important in the development of historiography. As the first line says, it's very, the contribution of many scholars. That means these scholars have done a research and they have written, and how did they come to write a book on history or on that event, whatever, and the process that they follow, they are giving guidelines. Let us have a look at the contributions of few notable scholars. We first come to René Descartes, born in 1596 to 1650. René Descartes was the foremost among scholars who insisted on verifying the reliability of historical documents. That means he's very clearly saying that whenever you get historical documents, you got to verify it. You got to go through and see whether it is the truth. It is a fact. Okay, and it is authentic. By critically examining them, among the rules given by him in his book, Discourse on the Method, here he wrote a book on the methodology of going about with the research. The following is supposed to have a great impact on the scientific method of research. Never to accept anything for true till all grounds are doubted. Very beautiful sentence, children. He says very clearly, unless and until all the doubts that come to your mind, unless and until it is not clear, you should not come to any conclusion. This is a message for all the historians. Voltaire. Voltaire's original name was Francois Marie Arouet. He was French. He opined that along with objective truth and chronology of historical events, considering social traditions, trade, economy, agriculture, are also equally important in historiography. That means when you go about doing a research about any event, these facts also come into it. That is the social being, traditions, trade, what was the trade during that time, how was the economy that time, how was the agriculture, and many features come while writing a book on history. It gave rise to the thought that understanding all aspects of human life is important for history writing. Thus, it is said that Voltaire was the founder of modern historiography. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was a German philosopher. He insisted that the historical reality should be presented in a logical manner. To him, the timeline of historical events was indicative of progress. It's very important sentence, children. Logical, that means there has to be logic, there has to be sense, okay? There has to be a rational sense, rational thinking as to why, when, where these things happen. To him, the timeline, historical event was the indicator. That means he goes back to chronology, from the time it began until date. He is talking about chronology here. He also thought that the presentation his of history is bound to change over time as new evidence would come forth. With Hegel's philosophy, many scholars were convinced that historical methods were not of lesser quality though they differed from scientific methods. The collection of his lectures and articles is published in a book entitled Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences. That means his book Reason in History is well known. It's very clear. As he says very clearly, children, he follows in the evidence, he follows in the methodology, he follows in the historical facts. He believes in the scientific method. That means there can be a scientific reason also why a certain thing happened during that time. Suppose suddenly an earthquake took place during Shivaji's time. Why an earthquake took place? It is a phenomenon which cannot be changed. So that will tell you about the situation during that time. How did the people come out of it, or how did people face it? So the collection of the lectures and articles published in his book, and in his book he tells all the details. It is good to know. We come to this. It is good to know this. According to Hegel, grasping the meaning of any event happens in terms of two direct opposites. Human mind cannot understand the true nature of that event without understanding the opposites. For example, wherever there is true, false, good, bad, etc. Now, children, what I want to say is, every action has got a reaction. If something is good, there has to be something that is bad. But something is true, then what is false? This is the question that comes through. So there are two direct opposites in human mind. There is nothing that is single. In order to understand the true nature of a thing, one needs to know both true and false, similarly good and bad. This method of analysis, which is based on opposites, is known as dialectics. In this method, a theory is proposed at the beginning, which is called thesis. Then another theory is proposed, which is counter to thesis. It is called antithesis. After a thorough logical discussion of the book, a new thesis is proposed, which concludes the gist of it. The thesis in the antithesis. This process of identifying the new thesis is called synthesis. That means, in nature, if there is anything true, there has to be something that is false.